Hello, it's Mark here at Guitar Heresy. This is my very first bass project, the first bass that I built. Worth kind of saying there actually that building something means slightly different things to different people. So it's worth being clear here. What I did here was build something from parts, but not in the sense of a kit. I got a body that I liked, a neck that I liked, did the work to make them fit to each other, and bought all the different bits of hardware and pickups and stuff to actually kind of complete the project as separate pieces. I learned a huge amount doing this. So what we got here is a bass using a Music Man style pickup. It's multi-scale, 34.5 to 33.5 inches. So it's almost take a standard long scale bass and just tweak that into multi-scale. So where did I start? I started by picking up the body. This was a very generic body. It was routed for a Music Man pickup. It was finished in poly over just the natural wood look. And I have to say, stripping that back was an absolute nightmare. So something that I will probably avoid doing in the future, even though I'd actually find that much easier to do now than I did then. Sanding that finish back because I couldn't get the heating and just peeling it off to work. You know, maybe that's a technique issue. You know, it could be entirely my problem, that one. But actually getting this sanded back actually was an absolute nightmare. Looking back at this, I've got no real pictures of the process as I was going through it. None. I've got 3, you know, and all taken at the same time. So I'll put up on screen now this one that I'm just going to look at here and talk about briefly. You can see from this one actually that, again, don't know the make of this body. I don't know the wood. This is actually a moderate way through the process when I'd already kind of routed the neck pocket. I'd made a range of the bits for this. I've laid on in the correct positions the bridge pieces and the knobs that I was making for it, those sorts of things. But I just include this so you can see how it started off really. As you can see in that photo, at that point, I'd sanded it back. Some of it had gone through to bare wood, but some of it actually there was still some of that poly left, which wouldn't have been a problem if I was going to just prime it and paint it, which was my initial plan. As you can see, in the end, I went for a wood stain and an oil finished effect, which required me then to sort of finish sanding that all the way down to bare wood all the way around it. The next thing I found for it, I was looking for bass necks, and actually I found this one. This, as I said before, is a multi-scale 33.5 to 34.5 inch neck. It's originally from an Ibanez SRMS 720, which is a moderately expensive guitar. I mean, how much people think is expensive varies massively. I don't have huge amounts of money, so actually a sort of £1,000–1,200 guitar sounds pretty expensive to me. This neck, though, actually was virtually unused. It was a real find. The multi-scale part of that I found really interesting and exciting. I'd kind of at this point when I was making this about a year ago, you know, kind of summer of 25, I was still pretty early in my journey of learning to play bass guitar, and actually looking at this neck, I kind of, you know, it looked fascinating. So when that came up, bought that, and actually knew then I was going to have to, you know, do significant changes to make all of this work out properly. So I guess when we start off with that, a couple of other things about the neck before we move on from that. It's 38mm here. It's quite a slim neck, which I really quite like the feel of. I've got a couple of guitars with more kind of P-bass style necks, which actually I find better for some music, and the slimmer ones I find better for other things. But actually, as far as moving around the fretboard fast, actually the slimness of this is just lovely. One of the things that was interesting with this when I first got it was that actually it was painted a kind of satin black. As soon as I started sanding that, because it had a few finger marks on it and went through fairly easily, I found actually it's beautiful under there. I think this is maple and walnut, though I haven't rechecked sort of looking up on that, but it looks like black walnut to me. So, absolutely lovely. And, kind of refinished very, very easily to a beautiful kind of consistency. Yeah, it's really, really nice. So, what did I do in terms of building this thing? The first thing I needed to do really was get that neck to fit that pocket. Interestingly, again, this was huge learning for me in this project, it being the first thing of anything like this that I'd done. Before this on guitars, the most I'd done is change pickups, which I'd done about like a month before I started this project. So I was very, very new to all of this. Some experience in working in mechanical stuff, but virtually nothing working with wood beyond putting together an IKEA bookcase, really. So actually thinking about routing out that neck pocket, I kind of found, bits that I could then stick down to almost kind of form the guides around this size of neck, and then routed that neck pocket. Worked okay, yeah, and actually fits just about perfectly. It's really kind of quite a nice fit in there. The only thing that I found tricky about that was figuring out exactly how wide to make the corners. Started off with a wider router so that you've got kind of broader corners, and then used narrower ones until it kind of fit. The other thing that I kind of needed to do routing wise was just slightly modify the pocket for the pickup as well, actually, but I came to doing that later. That one was quite important because actually just the kind of corner radius for the pickup that was in it was a little bit sort of more rounded than the pickup that I wanted to use. So this EMG actually wouldn't fit in there to start off with. I had to just really round the corners in slightly more acutely for that to fit. So, very minor, but all quite kind of, important learning at the time. Having got a body and a neck that would fit together, which, I showed in that last piece, I then had to sort of think about, the other bits that I needed. As far as fitting a multi-scale, you can get multi-scale bridges, but it's much, much simpler, and you've got far more options to go for just individual bridge pieces. I've been thinking for a while, and I decided I wanted to go for a kind of gold for the hardware of this. I went black and gold for the hardware at the neck with the tuners, because actually it looked a bit too much. I thought it might look too much if I just kind of used gold all the way through it, but I went for straight gold bridge pieces. And then had to think about how to lay all of that out and get all of that with the sort of precision that you need if you're going to get a guitar that works really well. One of the key things that I think was fascinating moving from working mechanically to working in the sense of a guitar and working with wood and stuff. The idea of using anything where you might bolt and then unbolt it, of just screwing into wood, seemed absurd to me. So the neck screws, very early on, I decided I was going to use threaded inserts and bolts, but that's not uncommon, for people to do that rather than just use screws. I know there are plenty of people that just use screws and a bolt-on neck, but actually it made much more sense to me to kind of make that boltable. And I have to say, for me as someone building this project, I ended up putting that neck on and off numerous times during little bits that I did to change stuff. So it was very, very much worth it. But that instinct to not use stuff that just screws into wood, I got a bit carried away with. Virtually everything on this, where there are screws, it's actually bolts going into inserts. Yeah, so the next thing, the bridges, actually, drilling that slightly oversized, putting inserts in, those are again bolts going into inserts, which kind of makes sense. I don't think I would do that now. I think it's easier to get it really accurate, actually, if you're just screwing into wood. Interesting comment, that one, actually. arguable. But I found that actually the fact that you could get just a little bit of movement there made it harder to get really exact spacing in the way that I wanted to for this. I think playing it's so much easier if you've got really exact measurements there. So what I've actually got here, let me just shift to filming some of this on my phone. Start filming that. Okay, where was I? So we've got these bridge pieces here where actually I've got little brass inserts that I put in to actually get a really exact kind of spacing going on here. I figured out the width of these. I think these were 15 mil and I needed, I think it was slightly different to that. Actually, I think it was 15.5 mil. I know I had to make sure that I filed all these to the very exact size. But basically, this is just brass bar that's the right kind of width, with the ends kind of tapered and then just polished so that the whole thing kind of matches in nicely. But so that as I bolted these together, starting with the two middle ones and the sort of piece in between those, actually I got a very exact spacing of how I needed the bridge pieces to sit. Again, really difficult to know if I was overdoing that, but I'm certainly happy with the result. And actually that worked out as a really good way of getting these nicely set up and nicely spaced. While we're here looking at the body, so I said I kind of just about everything I put to using threaded inserts. I'm a huge fan of doing that as far as the pickup goes, or pickups multiple times. Every kind of project I've worked on, I've done that. I just think it's so much nicer when you've got something here that you're potentially going to be, raising and lowering at different times, and maybe looking at different, different sounds that gets, etc. To have that go into a nice kind of, machined metal piece. So that again, I put threads in and would do again on any project. I even put threaded inserts in with regards to the pick guard, so that's kind of going a bit too far, I think. This pick guard, I kind of made this from just a piece of pick guard material. As you can see, it's got a roughly kind of Music Man type shape to it. I started off in terms of figuring out what I needed with a Music Man shape and just putting it over there. I figured out how I wanted it to go around this kind of neck pocket, in terms of actually it kind of cuts along right next to the neck, the fingerboard, and then kind of almost goes into a slightly smaller piece here. We needed this access for the truss rod. And kind of this looked okay. If you, again, thinking back to that original picture, at this point, when I was figuring this out, this was still left with that maple and walnut stripes in it. Actually, it was just too bright against the rest of what was going on here. So again, later I painted this black as well. Nice, really happy with that. That came in. I tried a few different versions of what I was going to do at this end. I cut one long and actually followed the steps of this, but actually it didn't really look that good. So actually it ended up being, as well as being simple, just looking better, to cut that straight across the bottom and just kind of round the corners from that original pick guard. I say pick guard, I used two of them because I kind of, did a few things with the first one and then decided I wanted to do stuff differently, etc., etc. And then kind of cut this from a sheet of pick guard material. This is actually the second one of those. Again, looking back at that photo of where the project was in the middle of summer last year, these, as they come, have got like a protective film over them that you kind of peel off. So I'd done that, but with the original one, I hadn't realised it looked like there was another bit of film still on the piece. So I started going at peeling that up one corner, and then realised it was actually the sort of celluloid type material that gives the this kind of fake abalone kind of view to it. And so I had to remake another one and bevel it and get all the right dimensions and everything else. So yeah, that was a bit of a faff, but generally fairly easy.
What else have we got here? The knobs. I made these specifically. I saw some brass ones in different sizes, and I thought actually that was a really nice, easy way of doing something customizable that I liked. I got the largest of the three sizes, and actually, if I were to do it again, I'd probably go for the minimum. Oh, by the way, this has got a push pull on it. This pickup is an EMG, their kind of Music Man style, but it's their TW range where it's actually works as a humbucker, or if you pull that pot, it then goes to a single coil, which gives some nice variety of sounds. For simplicity, I kept it to just one pickup, but I wanted some variety of sounds in there, So actually, that was that's. I've got to say, I like the sound of it as well. EMG ones come with really easy to use kind of like wiring and potentiometers and stuff. So actually doing that wiring was really, really easy. And we've just got volume and tone control with the volume being push pull. This was a bit of a later addition. If you've got two pickups, I wouldn't have done this. I'm so used to using a thumb rest quite a lot of the time whilst I play, and I've got in the habit of muting the higher strings with my little finger, that actually it was really useful to me to have a thumb rest on there. So I put that on initially. You can just about see the hole just below it. Initially straight, but actually angled worked better, sufficiently better that I kind of ended up just re-drilling it for that. I think that is the only thing on this guitar, apart from the screws that hold the tuners, which is just screwed into wood. Yeah, I think everything else is kind of going into inserts. Okay, so if that's the body, and think about talking about the head, the neck and the headstock. The neck here is 24 fret one with kind of this significant part here actually added on as well, where we've got the access to the truss rod and so forth. So it's quite a long neck in terms of how far it goes into the body of the guitar. That's part of the reason why I didn't put a second pickup in. That actually covers the end of the heel. The heel ends about here. So I'd have ended up putting a pickup here, very, very close to that one. Now, I know some guitars do have that, particularly bass guitars, two, and in some cases three pickups on fancy ones that actually are all together. I'm thinking here particularly with multi-scale ones, things like Dingwall. I've seen plenty of those with like three pickups on, which kind of, again, interesting range of sounds that comes from that, but there was no way, it would have looked cramped even if I'd just put a second one in there. So that's when I kind of really finally decided that I was just going to use the one pickup, and part of why I then wanted to use the push-pull, so that I had some variety in kind of tone that it could use. Other than that, this pickup, I talked about having to sand the back of it, but it took very, very little preparation, really. I polished the frets, they were all straight, they, it didn't really need any setting up. The one thing that did really was coming to this end of it. So again, if I just shift to using a more close-up view, okay. Looking at the headstock here, I did a number of things with this. This neck didn't come with a nut. So actually kind of creating one was going to be one of the things that I was going to find interesting about the project. The standard nut on these is still plastic as well. So I thought about using bone. I think I made a bone one actually, and brass. This is the second attempt on brass, because the first one worked, but it just looked really ugly by the time I'd done a number of bits of reshaping and so forth. And this is kind of coming into that. The other thing that I decided as I was working through it was to design it with a 0 fret on it. If you're not familiar with that, that means that we've got, as well as frets 1, 2, 3, etc., there's a fret 0 right back here. So it took a little bit of careful shaping of the nut to accommodate the kind of the infill of that, but the combination of the two gained me something that I could then set up very easily, and actually I thought was really nice. Yeah, very happy with how that came out. I've got a kind of truss rod cover bit here where there isn't a truss rod adjustment. Just purely visually, I just quite like that, kind of the look of it. The whole headstock, though, actually, maple, I couldn't stain really well to match the fingerboard. So this is, I think I ended up using sycamore here. This is a very thin plate of, it was thicker than veneer. It was about 1 mil thick, I think. 1.2 mil rings a bell, which actually I then stuck on top of the sanded original headstock so that I could then stain it to match the body of the guitar. To get that to match up and actually look good, let's just go here. I found that it didn't look perfect on the side, so I had to tape that up and then spray that black to get a kind of an infill between the two parts of it, the kind of the new headstock veneer, I guess is the best way to call it, and the original headstock. The shaping of this, though, is purely the original headstock style. Here we have the tuners I used, like the bridge pieces. These are from a company called Geica, who I really quite like. They just work really nicely. When I was doing a bit of research, they were just a company that came up moderately regularly that weren't absolute budget, but that people had good experiences of. I've got to say, since then I've seen a couple of people complaining about individual things where they had something that didn't work, but broadly speaking, all of the feedback I've seen has been really positive. My experience with Geica stuff, and I've now used their hardware on all of the succeeding projects, and a couple of other bits actually that I've done, I've used them for, and certainly I plan using them going forwards. They're reasonably priced for what they are. That doesn't mean that their stuff is necessarily cheap. Things like their CNC aluminium bridge pieces are not cheap, but they are pretty good for what they are. Yeah, so really happy with how that worked out. Now that combination of black and gold on these I think matched through. The bit that I didn't expect to get right at the beginning was gold strings as well, but when I was looking around I'd strung a couple of things where I'd just changed strings with La Bella flat wound bass strings and really liked them. And these, I later discovered they actually do them in a kind of gold, brass finish that I thought might just pick up really nicely. Other than that, they're exactly the same spec as the flat wound ones of theirs that I've used on a number of other projects before this, and actually just really liked. So very happy with how that all came out. Okay, so if that's the front of the guitar, I guess it's worth briefly talking about the back of it as well. I put a kind of initially just a brass plate on the back of this as a neck plate, with the bolts as I mentioned before. But then I noticed this come up on. Actually, I can't remember where I saw it, but I really liked it. Butterfly is a symbol that turns up in a number of other things that I do. The bike club I'm part of, and a number of other things. So actually that I kind of really quite liked, and it sitting on top of the brass actually worked really well there. And again, I just made a brass kind of control cover. But there we've got it. Now, as far as making it goes, the most annoying thing about the whole project was refinishing the body. I've mentioned that it was hard work to actually sand it all down, particularly given my health situation and I could only do a bit at a time. It took ages to get that sanded down. Originally, I wasn't going to stain it, I was going to paint it, which is why originally I hadn't needed to worry about putting a new plate on the front of the headstock.
And I painted it. I've painted stuff in the past. I've painted custom bikes and stuff like that. So actually using a spray gun and that side of stuff is kind of something that I have some skill in. I'm certainly no professional, but some skill in. So I painted this in a lovely purpley bluish metallic kind of slightly pearlescent colour, and then got some 2K clear to put over it. Now, if you're not familiar with that, actually 2K clear is a lot more complex than using something really simple, but it is a much harder, better wearing kind of final coat to put on things. Because I don't have the setup to do that safely with my normal spray kit, I actually got that in a kind of can, in a two-part, where you kind of use a thing that kind of like pierces a bit to mix the catalyst with the rest of the clear coat, and then sprayed it. And for some reason, the one that I had didn't harden. I think it must have been some sort of manufacturing error, to be honest. My best guess is that actually there'd been a manufacturing fault and there just wasn't any or certainly enough hardener in that reservoir when it was done, because I did everything absolutely according to instructions. And so I had a guitar that looked immaculate, and that you could, even a week or two later, you could make marks with your thumbnail in very, very easily, which just wasn't going to work. The company that I'd got that from absolutely refused to accept it was, a manufacturing problem or what have you, and so it was definitely something that I'd done wrong. So I got peed off with the whole thing, really, and at that point decided I'm going to do something different. At that point, I was going to have to sand it all back down and actually start again as far as the finish went. And this is the point where I realised I was going to have to do something with the headstock as well. So at that point, I kind of, sanded it all down and thought, look, I've never used wood stain, and the idea of using a wood stain and an oil finish is really interesting. It's something that would be new to me. It's something that kind of is quite different. So this, looking at a number of different projects people had done, I sanded that down, I stained it black, I sanded that back, less so on the edges, so it looks almost blue-black on the edges. I did sand that, but not as heavily. But here it just brings out the grain even more strongly than the natural grain was, and then dyed this blue. It was kind of quite a dark blue, obviously, and with that against the kind of dark colour behind it, it's come out as a really strong dark blue, which I've really liked, gotta say. I'm very happy with that. Having done that, I then needed to think about how to finish that. And again, having looked at a number of options, I went for using True Oil. If you haven't used True Oil, it's a mix of oils in the sense of just oiling wood in the normal sense, but with a number of elements that are polymerizing. So it forms a stronger surface to it. Now on this, I wanted to see if I could get it really to a proper kind of semi-gloss consistency, and that you need to build up slowly. The building it up slowly has some advantages. You can't develop, well, unless you do it badly, you can't develop runs in it the way that you do with spraying if you overdo that. You're wiping on a fairly thin layer, leaving it for a period of time, etc, etc. There are all sorts of different ways people tell you to do this if you look on the internet. The version that I used is that I'd take a day and I'd give it a layer, give it a few hours, do another layer, and normally do 3 or 4 layers that day, and then leave it for a couple of days. And actually it took a while of doing that to get the thickness that I wanted to be able to polish it to how it is here, where you can see the grain and you can kind of see the pores, but it's closer to a gloss finish. Again, let's try that with a kind of light closer to it. So what we have here is our guitar body with, and apologies for finger marks and stuff in it, but I think you can probably see there that what we've got is an almost gloss surface, but that just shows through a little bit of the graining of the wood underneath. And that's one of those things where if I'd wanted to go full gloss, I'd have just carried on and built up a thicker set of layers, to do that. By the way, whilst doing that, I've just noticed something else that I got wrong when I was doing this guitar. Can you see these rings around here? When I was putting the new potentiometers in, obviously you've got like kind of the screw thread comes up from below, and you screw the nut down onto that. I used a really normal spanner. I've got a set of ratchet spanners that I use mechanically, like this one. And actually what we've got there is just that somewhere around here it dug into the wood whilst I was bolting them in, and I didn't notice that until afterwards. So we've got like a semi-engraved ring around each one of those. That was deeply annoying at the time. For a first attempt, I think actually it all came together really well. So again, I have to say that I'm pretty happy with how it all came out in total. Having done all of that, all I needed to do then was, once I'd strung it up, was play the damn thing. So I'll either attach to the end of this. Now, I'll probably do it as a separate video, just show me playing a song where I've used it. Oh, that is something else I need to talk about. So there I'd finished it up, and I had a very standard, in some ways, long scale, multi-scale guitar. And actually I found, because I quite enjoy playing short scales, that I wasn't using it as much as I really wanted to. Because most of the time, if I was playing something that was tuned E, A, D, G, actually I would kind of grab a short scale. What short scales aren't good for, though, is kind of detuning. So actually for a while I had this set up in drop D, and I got myself another kind of 4-string multi-scale bass that's hanging over on that wall, which I'll do a review on at some point, that actually is still set up in drop D. What I eventually did, though, was to quite significantly change the tuning of this. That's the original G string in this set. It's currently set up B, E, A, D, so the top 4 strings of a 5-string bass. I got myself a 5-string bass and actually tried learning to play that, but actually found it really... I didn't take to it. I need to try that again at some point, but certainly at the point where I was in my learning at that point, I think I needed to concentrate on either 4 strings or 5 strings. But there are some songs where actually it's really useful having a 5-string, because actually that low B string, you really can't get anything close to that on a normal sort of 4-string bass. But this had enough scale length that actually shifting to it being strung like the top 4 strings of a 5-string was going to work. And Labella, you can buy their B strings separately for most of them, even for something as obscure as this kind of, gold coloured one. So I just bought a B string, which was like 14 quid or 16 quid, something like that, not a huge amount, and actually restrung the whole thing. Needed a bit of resetting up with the thicker strings, etc. But it's set up now, as I say, B, E, A, D. So actually it's unusual on the sort of guitar bits on songs where that I like, which use a low B string. It's unusual for them to also need the kind of the D string, G string, sorry. So B, E, A, D works really nicely for me. And actually it gets good use for that. Yeah, so still slightly more minority, and as I've gone on and developed other projects, obviously I've had other guitars that again I'm really enthusiastic about. But I learned so much doing this, really did. And actually found that I could do it, and that creative looking at what I could make something was something that I both could do and enjoy doing. It's an interesting one, that one. Actually, some people like that, some people don't. That ability to look at something and think, what could this become, is something that I really enjoy doing.
There's probably some ADHD traits in there, so yeah. So, Project 1. I hope you've enjoyed this and you found bits of it either interesting or useful, possibly both. And I hope you come back and look at some of the other videos of the other projects that I've worked on in the past and am working on in the present. Goodbye.